Yeah, YouTube stream should be live.
Um, just got the alert, and there we go. Yep.
Okay, so what did you get to since last time?
So much less than I intended. Unfortunately, I did get a better night's sleep though, so I guess there's some upside. The main thing that I wanted to, or that I focused on when I realized that I wasn't going to, be close to being able to do as much as I wanted, was to focus on writing about overreaching because I felt like that would be the more pressing matter. And so that was, I think this should have been sent this morning. So this is sort of my thoughts, I guess, both about myself but the topic in general. And it sort of ended up feeling pretty consistent, or like not consistent necessarily, but like a nice sort of package of an idea. And otherwise, I've started on the grammar exercises. I didn't bother trying to reread anything because I didn't have enough time to do that particularly effectively. Whereas I felt like the
Okay.
exercises would at least show what I didn't understand, so that we would be able to um, do something sort of more purposeful there. And so I posted so I was updating the what do you call it, the O2 exercises um, in my public folder thing. Um, and then I tried to do this last one was the last few minutes before I started to prep for this. And this was sort of interesting. Um, yeah, it's an interesting sentence. I'm not sure how I did. But so I did the first few examples, and I feel like as well I'm just going to stick to S expressions by default, as opposed to trying to do graphical trees unless I uh,
Yeah,
have a better way
they're
of doing them because it's
equivalent.
just too slow.
I have a S expression to tree converter software, by the way.
Oh yeah, is that like web stuff or how does it work?
No, it's a script which creates a dot file which you can process with GraphViz. So there's a
Ah,
few
yep.
steps, but it works. GraphViz
Um,
does have some limitations though. Like it doesn't add line breaks within nodes. You have to add them manually. So it
it
works
doesn't render them well, does it? It's like
not at all. It just puts everything on one line.
so I've been thinking about one of the ways that I've been overreaching during this period, is I started the other day trying to do I might still have it up actually. Uh, Trying to do uh, like a S expressions slash or the initial thing was like via converting mermaid, but particularly now S expressions and using D3 to try and render this stuff. I know it's somewhere, but
Oh, there's also this web one. Um, they just use square brackets and make trees from essentially S expression. I think there were some minor limits with it, but for simple stuff it works okay. I'll put the link in the
um,
tutoring channel.
um, I wonder if can I like if I no okay. Oops. All right, I'll just leave that for the minute. But the idea was to have like a little web app thing that would render it using D3. But it occurs to me that just doing it with like the HTML DOM might be better because you like it'll have paragraphs and things and just be um it'll automatically do all the formatting and stuff, and then you just have a big HTML page. Anyway, that's topic for another time.
Yeah, if you search for this link on FI, you should be able to find my my S expression conversion script as well. They should be in the same thread somewhere.
In the archives.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just search for it and then leave that to do later. Anyway, yeah, so the first one, provided that I've got that right, I feel like that's pretty. I figured that we'd probably like go through the stuff that I did to make sure or figure out what I did and didn't understand, and then we can figure out what to do from there.
Okay, I don't use Google Docs much, so I don't know how to get to your other grammar from this one.
Okay, let me I'll send you a. Oh, actually, in the link that I sent you, or sorry, the link that so the most recent email I made to Fallible Ideas an hour ago, there's a link at the bottom of that.
Oh, okay.
So that might be that's the best way. But yeah, but you can't like documents in Google Docs or Google Drive. They
Here we
they
go.
don't exist inside a like they don't exist inside a folder as such. There's sort of like a link, and then you can have them in many folders. So there's no way to like go from a thing to back to the folder it's in, from a document back to the folder.
Okay, so this one O2 exercises?
Yeah, this is the one I was working in. So I've copy pasted the latest into there, I think, which should be the universities are full thing at the end. Yep. I'll just make the margins bigger so that it doesn't look as painful.
Impolite doesn't quite seem like a thing. I think it's more of a trait regarding whether it's an adjective.
I think did I Google it to get that?
So I'm agreeing with you.
Oh, okay, yeah. As in it's not a noun. No, the initial guess was, I mean, impoliteness would be a noun.
Yeah. Yep, there it is in the dictionary. Impolitely for the adverb and ness for the noun. There's common word endings that give you big clues, like ly for adverbs and ness for nouns.
Yeah, where was there's a
And
quote that
tion for nouns as well.
So in just under the farting or belching thing, I've left so the idea was that my notes and things I would leave as quotes there. So oh yeah, so to recover again is just a note to self to like make sure I go back and look at the material. But yeah, because they had like issues with the farting and the belching. So so fart is a noun. So it doesn't make sense that as a verbal it would end up being an adjective. Yeah, so it has to be, yeah.
Some of the big clues here are 1, these are the subject, and the subject has to be a noun. And 2, they end with ing, which is a noun indicator.
As in, like the belching and the farting.
Yeah.
So they are nouns.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
They're also verbals. They're coming from verbs, but they're playing a noun role in this sentence.
So isn't just in terms of
So they're gerunds as well as nouns.
oh, because it's not yeah, it's not like so a belch is a noun, but also to belch. Yep. Okay, so they're the verbal form of the verb, not of the noun. So that's why I initially again tried to use the markdown squiggly out
I see.
thing. So that's funny. I was right, and yeah.
Participles usually end with ed or en. You can look up lists to get a feel for them.
That helped with adverbs. I think I looked up a whole bunch of.
Yeah, if you just go through a bunch of common ones, you get like it gives you an idea of the category. It works well with prepositions because those are a bit hard to explain. But when you see a bunch of them, you're like, oh, I know that type of word. Like you already have a feel for them.
Yep.
Okay, applying adjectives to adjectives. That's not a thing. If it applies to an adjective, it's an adverb.
Yep. So that was where was yeah, that was mildly was
Yeah,
the
mildly is applying to an adjective, so it has to be an adverb. And when you get these things that raise or lower the degree, that's a adverb type job. Like very or to.
Yep.
Okay, fancy university. Okay, so we're having the conjunction as the root node. Then the first verb is went, and the second verb is am. The still. Let's see.
Um,
So it depends on what word you think still is modifying. Is that what you're having trouble with, or was it something else?
yeah, as in is still. So that's what I was. And I think it. So I think it does modify the I, in that, or it seems to, in because you're talking about uh like I am still in. I have not been able to progress out of the state, sort of thing, is how I read it.
Okay, so
I feel
still
like you. Oh,
applies to ignorant. It's a type of ignorance. It's an ignorance that has lasted over time.
okay, so it's not that you're persisting in a state, sort of thing. I think I've got it.
So up to and including even now as formerly. I think it's
Yeah. Okay.
this
So
one.
still is a modifier on the verb, or the like lives in this case.
I think it's modifying ignorant to
Um,
talk about the nature of the ignorance, that it has persisted over time.
Yep. And I mean, even so, in the other sentence, in the example sentence in the dictionary, lives is an adjective too, right? It's not actually a it's not a verb. Because it's modifying the he.
No, I think lives
Oh,
is the verb here. It's the action that he's doing. It's present tense.
okay.
You could swap it with lived, and it might be easier for you to see. Like he lived with his mother.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. No, that makes sense.
Present
The
tense is
ad
less common.
um yeah, the categorization of what adverbs apply to is something I haven't crocked yet.
then also the quite, you have it as the child of ignorant, yeah?
Yep.
So it needs to be an adverb rather than an adjective.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Of course, because as we mentioned earlier, adjectives don't modify adjectives. And of course, it wouldn't be anyway because I've thought of like quite red was the thing at the time, but yeah, you can't be quite car, for
Yeah.
example.
Okay, so you're getting most of the tree structure correct. If you're understanding most of the words, I think.
Yep.
I
The
write because I like good ideas.
the am earlier, that was definitely it took me a few minutes, or not minutes, but I had to look at it for a good few seconds before I realized. So this one I sort of did inside out in many ways.
Yeah, the first thing I notice is the clause order. So
Oh, it would make more it would be easier to analyze if we changed it to like don't attend a university full of uncurious professors.
yeah, so when a sentence is written with subordinating conjunction, clause, comma, clause, then it's in a non-standard order. The second one is actually the main clause, and the first one is the subordinate clause.
So I should put the do not attend before our universities.
That is how I would do it in general. There's flexibility about how to represent things. But
I think
I think standardizing if as meaning if x, or sorry, x if y, so having the conditional thing be second
yep, do not
will
attend if blah. Yep.
is going to work better in general because it matches the more standard order of the clauses. Although we reverse them a lot when we're using if. It's really common.
Yeah, I notice it particularly in coding in that some languages allow you to put it in the middle or like where the condition is, that sort of thing. If then makes things a lot more explicit. It's sort of like we use like a do, like a coding do expression type thing in terms of do X and then while condition in terms of English.
Yeah, so do not attend one gets into verbal stuff. Do is the finite verb, and attend is the content verb. Do is considered an auxiliary verb because it's not telling you the main topic of the sentence, but it is the grammatically primary verb.
Yeah. That I initially had, the reason the comment is after attend is because I initially had that as the main verb.
Where'd the one go?
So did, just looking at mine. So the one, oh, that's under universities.
Okay, that's confusing me. Shouldn't it be in this clause? So somewhere in here.
I didn't know where to put it, but I put it under universities because it refers to, oh, no, okay. So I interpreted it like A would be used as a modifier, like a university. But of course, it's not that; it's a noun, which is why, which it makes a lot more sense in the other clause.
Yep. It's a pronoun, it's a reference noun. So it does refer to the university.
Yeah, but it's not a modifier, and it makes sense because you couldn't put
Yeah.
a or the in there. So I try, by the way, whenever I try not to Google things, like if I can, and like at the very least make a guess first. Of was because of time and whatever else I did things so that's how I sort of marked that here. And then since it was prepositional, that then helped me resolve the rest pretty quickly.
Okay, then for one, what should its parent be?
Oh, so I've if yeah, we haven't modified that. I'll just copy in. Oops. So this is how I've rearranged it on my side. I didn't want to, or I was trying to avoid changing the document, particularly while you're looking at it, but just as a leave it
Okay,
how it is.
so you have do as the parent of one. So one is the object. So it's saying do one.
That doesn't make sense, does it? Attend one is what actually makes sense.
Yep. So it should be chained under there.
I think I've got a grouping issue as well.
Yeah, I'm
Uh,
looking at this right now.
so
So universities is the subject, right?
yes, yep. And then we've got to have something like full of uncurious professors would be the thing that they are. And so I think it's just
Yeah.
a matter of pulling that out. And universities doesn't have anything underneath it. Or is it so in terms of like if universities is a subject of R, then the object so full of uncurious professors feels like it has to be a group, like a one thing together.
Yes. The whole thing as a group has a noun role and is the complement for R.
So yep. Um,
So I'm not sure why you have two words together here.
so I started doing that because I wasn't sure if it was an infinitive, and to start with, and because we talked the other day about keeping infinitives together, like in to something as one unit. That's why I put it there, just like that.
Okay, that was only for the word to and
Yep.
no other words, and it would always be before the verb, not after.
Yes. Yep.
To is a special thing called a particle in some of its uses.
All right. Cool. So this is what I have now.
Okay, so this makes of the child of
Which is
R.
not because it's a modifier of full. No. Well, it is a
Yeah,
modifier of full.
yeah, so
Professors
of,
have to be the
go ahead.
as in so the way I'm refactoring it is so my hesitation with like putting the professors as a root here is well, it sort of doesn't feel right, but because you would never say that like uncurious professors are universities. So that was my initial sort of reasoning for.
Okay, so what is the thing that it's saying universities are in one word? What is the main
Full.
thing that they are?
Full.
Yes. So full should be the complement, and it should be the child of are. Then
Okay.
these other words make a prepositional phrase that modifies full.
So
So
and
giving
then
extra detail about the type of fullness.
yeah. So the professors are like children of.
Yes. The professors are the prepositional object.
Cool. All right, I've updated that now. Oh, sorry, this part, the of there, the double thing is just meant to be a comment. Although I guess that's the true in Lisp too. The double colon is the Haskell type annotation thing, which felt appropriate to use.
Yeah, I understand the labeling of parts of speech. That makes sense. Okay, does try reading the tree version and see if you can sort of intuitively read it in tree form and see how it fits together and if it makes sense.
Yeah, so it's sort of like if it is the case that universities are full of professors which are uncurious, then do not attend one. Or then do attend one, but reverse that statement, is sort of how I read that. Would you ever put not on the left?
Uh, I didn't because it's a modifier, and I put the modifiers after the more crucial stuff. Not happens to be extremely important to the meaning of the sentence, but grammatically it's less important.
Mm.
It's not a huge deal, especially because you're labeling parts of speech. Like if we label what attend is and what not is, then the order doesn't even matter. And if the
Yep,
order doesn't matter, then as a rule of thumb, follow the same order in the original sentence is good.
yep. Um,
The way I would read the sentence for the overall structure in terms of content, rather than the specific way it was presented, is this is the basic structure. So I'd say it's do X if Y are Z.
yep,
So you can read the main clause in terms of content first before the condition, and it also works that way.
yep. You sort of got to start on the bottom left then. Like as in if you like one of the thinking about like a path you could take through it. So you could say X should be performed on condition, and then the condition is essentially take value Y, test it using Z, see if that's true. And so you can sort of go left to right that way.
Yeah, English has a different ordering than the trees do. So the mappings, you have to like reorder things a bit to make them come out nice. Okay, so that sentence clear enough now?
Yes, yep. No, that's much clearer. I left the last one because it looks like it's a long example.
Okay, for next time, when you work on some of the grammar practice, why don't you try searching the FI archives and compare your answers to someone else's answers and see how useful that is, how that works out for you.
Yep. So I actually, where was it? I think in my other doc, was it? There was somewhere here where I started to note down what like issues that I had the first time and what to sort of do about them. Anyway, now I don't know whether, but I think I made it as a comment. I think it was on O1 grammar, so I'm not sure what's. Oh no, there it is. It just didn't load. Anyway, I bring this up because just thinking about whether it's worth, like this was my attempt at, well, what to do about it essentially to avoid it. Obviously, I didn't avoid it. I mean, the main thing out of that comment that matters is start earlier, which I didn't do either.
Yeah, that's okay. It seems like you're actually working on it and making headway. So
So
it
I'm
seems
not
like a reasonable start to me.
I sort of I'm careful not to be too negative about what do you call it, about doing it, partially because like as in my overreaching being some of the inspiration for spending a lot more time on it. It's probably expected that solving that problem is something that people will overreach while doing.
Yeah,
So as long as
the important thing is to be making progress and not to be stuck, primarily.
I don't feel like I'm stuck, so that's good.
Yeah.
I actually feel a lot better already about writing, like as in the thing that I posted to FI. I figured that was like an appropriate thing to do with regards to was that it? That was interesting just on your screen when that came up. The
The email?
Zoom thing. Yeah, but it's like the rest of my screen like flickered out. Anyway, this is running on like it's an X11 server, so it's I wonder if that's why. But like I felt a lot better writing this than I usually do writing stuff. And so even if it's not like particularly well organized, I feel like I'm definitely making progress there.
Okay. Do you want to go through this email now?
Yeah. Well, this was like when you yesterday when you said one thing to do would be write about what overreaching meant to me. This was essentially my answer to that.
Okay.
I realized so I started like shortly after yesterday's tutorial, but I didn't get very far before I got distracted by something and so on, and I had something later that afternoon. Anyway, I ended up pushing all of that right to the end, so it starts maybe not in the or it starts maybe a little bit contrived because of like the task at hand sort of thing.
Okay. So I think what I'll try doing is putting it into an idea tree as I read through it in order to organize it more and give a demonstration.
That sounds good.
0, you exist and maybe do things. Implicit, but good to put down. Okay, so we're starting very foundational.
Yeah, we take a really big leap essentially from there, but it meant by putting it down explicitly, it meant that if anyone wanted to criticize the link from starting point 0 to the first point in the list, then it's far easier to do that. And I'm admitting that I'm considering this, and so if I've forgotten something, it's like I can't evade the idea of having forgotten it because it's explicit now.
Okay, and I'm going to leave these details out for now
Mhm.
and try to focus on main points. I also split this up because it seemed like 2 different statements.
Yes, yep. No, I think it's well, I sort of explicitly treat it as 2 in a bit.
Okay. Avoiding the problem. Denial, lying to yourself, not taking it seriously, or claiming there are bigger problems, etc. This one's a little trickier because it's not a complete sentence. These are all things, they're nouns.
Yep. So it'd be people will, or when
Yeah,
they
it's
start to
people do
realize
these things.
this might be a thing, this is their response to either other people saying it or ways to reassure themselves. Ultimately, their goal is to not have to acknowledge the problem and the seriousness of it. So I'm not sure if that actually comes through particularly well, but I feel like that was sort of as in all the behaviors are, I feel like the important part of the avoiding. I guess that particularly becomes relevant later on when I like reflect on myself a bit more, in the sense that well, I mean, we'll get to it. We'll see if it's if you click
Okay.
the middle and oh yeah, there
Yeah,
you go.
I was confused about which one was the middle because the middle was actually the bottom one.
Yep. Oh, because it's got, I
See,
mean, like
like
that
this.
rendering,
Yeah, this one is actually the middle one.
and then the bottom one is that blue thing in the middle,
Yeah.
or
Eventually not doing it anymore. I'm not sure what it is. Is it overreaching or avoiding or trying? Are you thinking, or did audio screw up? Wait, no, okay, my audio is working. But you're not talking at the moment.
All right, is this working again now?
Yep. Yeah, now it's working.
Cool. The tag OR at the start of those of points 3 and 4
Uh-huh.
is meant to mean overreaching, not or. I'm just
Oh,
as
I
in
was
like
thinking or.
yeah, no, I'm sorry that I was trying to mark that this is like a thing that I don't know enough about to actually be able to evaluate whether it's right or not.
Oh, I see the statement. You're not confident about the statement.
Yes, yep.
Okay. And then
This
what
was
does the it refer to?
so the it is always overreaching. Um,
Okay.
so like or rather maybe the act of so cycle of attempting to solve one's uh like tendency to overreach, but dropping back to step 2. Like the problems in step 2 are um like they can be problems in themselves. It might be hard to stop lying to oneself, for example, but I sort of just presume for this that you can stop doing it. For the simplicity of these 4 steps.
Okay, this makes sense that if you have big goals, then it's more understandable not to get there. Yeah, you shouldn't do that all the time. That makes sense. You should, on a regular basis, have some sort of projects or ways of testing yourself, or something where you can check that you're succeeding in some sort of objective way. You should be having success sometimes. Um,
Yeah, particularly the problem with so I mean, even when you do this, you should expect to like succeed by luck sometimes, right? Um, but I sort of try and deal with this more in the B part of the thing just below it.
yeah, rules of thumb are tricky. They're in the sense of blurry, vague thoughts where you don't fully understand what you're doing. You don't
I
know the
find
cause and effect well enough in the
they
principles.
also like I mean often rules of thumb can have plenty of value to one's life, but yeah, the danger is that they always have to become like a blocker at some point um, in any series of progress. Oh,
Okay, so a lot of this is a lot of it's related to you, and
mm.
it's a bit hard to organize. So
Yeah, I think the gist of or the points. So there's the stuff at the start, um, and then the main sort of point of it is B. I think, in the second thing. This is actually something I was thinking about as well. Was like I think about a lot of things in terms of myself, but I don't like. I don't think that's necessarily good, because it means that I'm not able to deal with ideas generally as well. If I always have to relate them back to myself, like that's obviously going to restrict the set of what I can consider and understand.
Yeah, it's good to be fluent with multiple perspectives. Applying it to yourself or your perspective, and a attempt at a neutral objective perspective, or maybe even several of those based on different schools of thought, and also being able to look at other people's perspectives, specific individuals, as well as common types of people, like a Democrat or a Republican, and having some idea of how they look at things. Okay,
I
so
think I have a lot.
Go ahead.
I was going to say I think I have a lot of trouble separating, like, holding an idea from the experience of holding an idea, if that makes sense. Like I have a tendency to want to add things like I think to indicate unsurety. Um, yeah, like if it, yeah,
I think it's fine to do that if you are unsure. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. Okay, so the original idea of overreaching is something like,
oh, the way that I put it, by the way, sorry, I figured I'd say that before you start talking, so it's not biased or anchored or whatever. So rate of progression and rate of errors, and when error uh, exceeds your rate of progression such you can't actually make progress, it's not. I was thinking about this the other day. Oh, yeah, well, this morning or last night. Uh, it's not. I can't remember if the correction I had was to change the thing to rate of progress from whatever I had before, but I feel like that's rate of progress is not exactly it. But yeah, but that's the definition I picked up at least.
yep, there's one along those lines. So trying to keep it simple to start with. The main idea, people do too much stuff that's too hard. So this causes failures. This leads to failures. And like stress and difficulty and so on. And if people could do an amount of stuff that fits their ability to get stuff done so it matched up well, then they'd be more successful.
Yep.
Similar somewhat to like a factory and the goal and business management practices where they're trying to organize things to efficiently use the resources, but they don't want to take on more orders than they can fulfill, and because then you end up with late orders and clutter on the factory floor and so on.
Yep.
So then one of the other ideas is what you were talking about. People have an error rate. People have an error correction rate. When the error rate is significantly above the error correction rate, then errors build up infinitely.
Yep.
This
You mean
is,
infinitely in terms of time here, right? As in, as opposed to an infinite number of errors. Obviously, you
yeah, I
sort of
mean,
stop being able to,
there's no limit. They just keep building up
Mm.
and accumulating.
like, unbounded. Yep.
Yeah. So we have a simpler way to think about it and a more abstract way. Then there are other ways to think about it, like people do stuff that's too complex and sophisticated and clever. They don't understand what they're doing very well. They fail a lot and don't realize it. And a lot of why they don't know they're failing is because they're doing things they don't understand. If they did things they understood better, they'd be able to tell whether they were succeeding or not.
Yeah, so that's like when you try and do a maths problem that's too hard and you haven't learnt the foundations for that like branch of maths yet, type thing. Or no, it sounds a bit more subtle than that. If you're failing and not realize, like with maths, it's fairly discrete. You can't, it's hard to know that you're failing. Sorry, hard to not know that you're failing. But yeah. So like the early days of Flux. So having no experience with political stuff or whatever else, getting registered is it's a matter of like process. But in terms of the stuff that we were doing out, like either talking to media or things like that, we didn't even know enough to know how to tell whether we were doing a good job or not. So we could think that we were doing a great job, but we're actually, hurting ourselves by doing it, or not making progress at least.
Yeah.
And the results for the first first election definitely show that. I think I've got it.
Okay, so another way to look at it is proceeding while missing prerequisites. This is one of the things that's going to cause a high error rate because you don't actually have the tools for success. So the different meanings are related to each other, like you can find ways to connect them. Okay, and doing too many things. Another one. Leads to lots of stuff not getting done, which is a way of failing at that stuff. It's also a way of failing at prioritization because you aren't making a priority list yourself and then deciding what's on it if some stuff just doesn't get done, like it falls through the cracks. You're not controlling it according to your own plan.
Yep. I feel like, well, all of them are related, and I'm doing many of them to some extent, but this feels like particularly the thing at the moment that I have a lot of trouble with. No individual task is beyond me, or at least as far as I can tell, but it's definitely definitely that I'm presuming I have a higher capacity than I have.
Okay. So, have you read both of the main articles about it? I forget if there's another one. There might be. But there's the Fallible Ideas one as well as the one on elliotttemple.com.
So I think I've read Fallible Ideas one. From memory, it's like not particularly long.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about. Oh, and in terms of the one on elliotttemple.com, I don't think so. Maybe I haven't read very much on that site particularly.
Okay. So I would definitely recommend reading this one then and seeing what you think of it.
Actually, maybe I've started this before. At least the beginning feels familiar.
I know there's another one, I'm just finding it. In the pins.
Yeah, so I have read the Fallible Ideas one, but not recently.
Okay, so there's also this one that's in Discord. I think I might have copied it somewhere else, but I just put the Discord link.
Cool.
Okay, so these are some of the main ideas about what goes wrong. And so related to all these things, there is a pattern I've run into in discussions that I connect to overreaching that I think is really important. So discussion pattern. So Joe makes an error. I criticize. So I'm going to label it E1. So I criticize E1 with C1. We discuss C1. Joe makes error E2 while discussing C1. I criticize 2 with E2. Yes.
So I already can tell that I've done this a bunch in the past. Thinking like 2018, sort of, as in the discussions at FI there. Maybe 2017. Like all the discussion topics about flux and the dictator's handbook and so on and so on. The
Yeah,
ones
so basic pattern is when you're trying to resolve a subtree, you never finish resolving that subtree because it branches and adds new stuff to it faster than you can resolve it. So
Yep.
you don't ever get back to the original topic unless you just ignore a bunch of problems.
Yeah, where the only logical conclusion, if you choose to do that, then is to abandon the original idea, or at least to acknowledge that there are no good reasons for thinking it's true. So my guess at the solution is that, in essence, it needs to like involve the general education of the counterparty on whatever topic it is. Like they need to go away and do some work, because that's the only way to potentially reduce that expansion rate of subtrees to a manageable level.
That can help, but think about it from a beginning of infinity perspective. No matter how much you learn, there's always going to be plenty of stuff that you don't know. So the more important issue is how well you calibrate what you're claiming and trying to do to your knowledge. No matter how much you know, you could do things that are too ambitious, and then you're screwing up all the time and getting out of the bounds of what you actually understand. On the other hand, even someone who knows much less than the average person could make simple statements that are within their abilities and not have this spiral happen.
Mm. I guessed while you were saying that the choice of trees and uh, whether to go down them or not was a significant thing in that uh, the like one of the ways that you deal with the problem is to be more selective about how to actually address the things. But I don't think that's actually the case anymore. I think you just end up in the same position. It's just that because you're not, for example, if you explore it breadth first, then I mean it's probably easy to see that that's not going to last very long. But you get a particular type of expansion. Um, but what you were describing in terms of E1, C1, E2, C2, etc. That's just a different way to look at the same thing. You're ultimately not going to solve the problem by choosing different trees alone or different branches alone, unless it convinces the other person that they need to go do something.
Yeah, so lots of things are tangential comments or uh, things that don't have to be resolved in order to continue the topic, or things we can agree to disagree about, or so on. And in those cases, you don't have to explore all the subtrees, but there are also subtrees about, like, I think that's wrong because this, and then you can't just, like, ignore that and continue with the premise under dispute. Your only
Mm.
choices are either to resolve the criticism of it or abandon that note entirely, like withdraw it from the conversation and then try a different approach.
Yep. Which is obviously fatal to some ideas, depending on the node.
This is a problem I run into a lot because people assume that I'm being picky or pedantic or splitting hairs or something when I argue with them. And they think that, like, a lot of the criticisms just aren't that important and could be ignored. But they don't say this out loud, which makes it very hard to tell them why I think each one is important. They don't actually express the issue of what they're doubting or disagreeing with.
My interpretation of that has been uh, so it's the expectation that people will give you the charitable interpretation because you've for some reason earned it or you feel like you deserve it. Um, which I very much disagree with now. As in when we were talking, I think yesterday or the day before about the um, uh, people are used to other people doing error correction for them. So that's what I mean by the charitable interpretation. Um,
Yeah, so I will do error correction for people when I think I can and it's not really a problem. For example, probably the majority of their typos, I can guess what they meant, and it's
mm,
not like a key term or something that causes an important ambiguity. So I can just ignore the problem. But uh, too many of their errors, more than they seem to realize, are actually important things that I can't just guess what they mean for them. And they actually have to say something correct themselves sometimes. Or I'd just
yeah,
be discussing with myself if I had to like if I'm doing too much cleanup of their work, then I might be like the majority author of their side of the discussion,
yeah.
which
That's
causes
exactly what I
problems.
was. I think the limit is if you have to do philosophical work to correct their errors, then no one should expect that. No one's entitled to it. But if it's something like a typo, there's very little, philosophical work that you have to do for that. That's far more just a mechanical process by comparison.
put this one or increase, like warning. Okay, so these were the things we mentioned earlier. I've added them to the tree now.
Yep. So I had an idea while you were saying that, or while the matching your ambition to the ability. So it's possible that maybe a new strategy comes along for how to tackle a problem which lowers the necessary ability there. But particularly if
Yes.
you're the person creating that strategy, if it's your idea, then how would you, as someone who previously wasn't able to, like it was below your ability to do the normal way, how would you be able to evaluate that your thing is correct or not? So for some things that might be fine, but in general, you can't rely on that as a solution if like new knowledge is a solution to that, if you're the one who's created it.
Yeah, so that reminds me of another version of what is overreaching. If you're having trouble self-evaluating your own ideas objectively and being able to tell which ones are successful or not just ideas, but also actions, projects, whatever, then that's a really bad sign. One of the most important things is doing things where you can judge, did I succeed or fail, objectively judge it.
Cool. Do you mind if we take a break for 2 minutes?
Go ahead.
Thanks. All right, back.
Okay, so I added a couple more nodes. A big part of making progress is expanding what you can judge objectively. Um, what issues can you actually tell success and failure on? And if you want to do something but you wouldn't be able to tell how well you were doing at it, then you need to find some ways to build up towards it so that you'll be able to evaluate as you go along.
So it occurs to me that like finding someone to tutor you is a way of doing that. Um, like other people in general can be a way. Other outside anything where you can sort of, I guess, trust that it can objectively, or at least objectively enough, tell you about problems.
Yes, getting a teacher, a expert, an authority, some sort of source of knowledge that you're willing to learn from and view as correct, textbook, whatever, answer keys, is one of the things you can use as a tool to help you judge success and failure. When you're doing it that way, and it's not entirely your own judgment, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket or in highly correlated baskets, such as all of the mainstream textbooks come from the same few companies made by the same processes. They're all sort of coming from the same point of view.
Yep.
So they're all highly correlated, and if one of them has a flaw, then maybe they all do. You're very vulnerable to systematic error, just like you would be if you just picked one single authority to listen to.
Yep. I
So
feel like
things you can do about that are using other methods as well, and using a variety of sources and double checking, and especially checking some popular sources, some famous sources, some mainstream sources. Like, know the standard schools of thought and have some idea of what they are, and that gives you more perspective so you don't get caught up in some like weird error.
Yep. Physics comes to mind in terms of Copenhagen and Everett's many worlds and so on.
So this is actually related to stuff I've been writing about recently. So for example, measurement is something that people are especially good at judging objectively. If you can find a way to
Mhm.
measure success and failure, or to have criteria of success that involve measurable quantities, then it's easy to judge.
Yep. Yep. I think they're better at evaluating whether a measurement is like able to be applied or not, sort of thing. There's less ways for them to make a mistake there, as opposed to, trying to do the measurement themselves.
Yeah, so when people use a ruler, bias doesn't have much room to make them get it wrong. They know how to use a ruler without fooling themselves about how long something is. Pretty well,
Or
not perfect, but
or to tell if
it's
a
one of
rule
the
is
things they're
broken or
better at.
wrong.
And then people know how to use timers, which is one of the reasons speedrunning is good. Is in the speedrun community, people cannot fool themselves about how good they are very effectively, because everyone has this is your best time.
Yep.
And businesses like using measurements such as revenue, unit sales, profit. These are things they can put numbers on. Number of visitors to the website, number of visitors to the website that convert through the sign up form, etc. And because they're able to measure those things, people do a better job with them. Especially when they actually use measurement, like A/B testing works
Mhm.
really well compared to not measuring and just hiring an expert to say, well, I think this copy is what users would like. And it turns out the experts often get that quite wrong, and it's hard to tell. And if you just test it and measure, you can do a lot better.
This reminds me of so yeah, in 2016 I ended up running a like a Facebook ad campaign, and because I was so bad at it, because I'd never done this sort of thing and I'm not good at social media stuff, um, I went and Googled around for A/B testing, which I knew sort of in principle, but nothing about it. Um, Comparing like my subsequent performance to the performance of actual like social media managers who had been working in the role, um, I ended up having higher performance in terms of the ability to achieve something with A/B testing, in part because I don't think they didn't trust the measurements as much, or they didn't perform as many measurements um, because they had like essentially more confidence in their own ability. Anyway, I found that sort of interesting at the time.
Yeah, that's not too surprising to me that uh, not being very good at it, but focusing on the measurements works better than allowing more bias into it by saying, I'm going to overrule the measurements sometimes.
Particularly with
Even,
social media,
yeah.
Oh yeah, just because it's, if you've got a small thing to create, like, you're creating a 20-word maximum sort of phrase, or collection of words, finding a picture, maybe putting some words on the picture. There's like the most of that's just creativity about what might other people respond to, and you just come up with as many ideas as you can, throw them all into a big measurement machine, and disable the ones that don't work. As opposed to like engineering, you couldn't make a car like that. You've got to have a lot more explanatory knowledge in the car, because you can't create something that's consistent and works with as few bits of information or ideas.
Yeah. Yeah, so measurement is one of the things people are particularly good at. And then people have a harder time when it gets into philosophy debates, political debates, um, clashes of ideas that get far away from math and numbers and quantities. And then they have more trouble deciding those kind of issues. They seem to people like matters of opinion, which I think when people think it's a matter of opinion, that's a sign that they're overreaching. They don't know how to think objectively about it.
Yeah. Um, would you say in general, so just sort of, so as knowledge makes progress in any particular field, we tend to, so before like the next sort of, I mean, the idea of like plateaus of science progression, for example, as an example, before we go from one sort of generation of ideas to the next, we have at least the essence of one of the good ideas that's going to be part of the next one. But there's uncertainty about, like, or in the community in general, there's no agreement on which idea is better. And at that stage, we can only use like our knowledge of explanations to tell, but that one of the results of going that stage up is being able to, or we've created enough new knowledge that now we have a way to actually measure that past disagreement. Um, I'm trying to think of like examples of that. Like, I mean, how would we measure whether evolution is correct? I mean, we can definitely measure gene drift and things now. I mean, even we've got at least good conjectures for how we might be able to measure it. Whereas in 1850 odd, there were no conjectures really for how to measure it. Well, I don't know, but that would maybe be an example.
Well, even at the very beginning, you could look at the animals and see that they were grouped into many similar animals, which we call species. And that was an observable thing back then. That was part of why the theory was come up with. Um, and that is what you would expect if evolution was true. And this differentiates evolution from some theories, some potential ideas that would predict something else. So you could have a model of animals as sort of like God made a theme park of all the animals, as and he made like one of each one, because why would you have two of the same one? Like they're all
Yeah.
custom one-off things. And then you
So we
look
have,
at reality and you're like, nope, that one's wrong.
yeah, we expect far more inconsistency over here than we observe, where there's a lot of particular style of order that we observe.
So even from the beginning, you could observe some things and it would rule out some ideas, and evolution was carefully staying in the not ruled out category. And then over time, we've gotten more relevant data, such as digging up a bunch of fossils, and we've looked at them and found they were compatible with evolution. And sometimes they were problematic. Usually they didn't challenge like the core theory, but they at least, some of them presented some difficulties. People wondered, like, how could something have evolved from this to this? Like, what sort of process might have enabled that? Like, how did the eye get developed? Isn't that just sort of too good to be true? And there are detailed answers to that. There are demonstrations with physical objects. There are written explanations. People have worked out a lot of details of how many different specific things could evolve, and every piece of data we have doesn't contradict them.
Yep. Is there a reason you chose to say doesn't contradict instead of consistent there?
Not really.
Okay.
Consistent is fine. So in terms of judgment and being able to evaluate success and failure, two more things. One is so you can work on it from the angle of figuring out better objectives and figuring out relevant measurable objectives, for example. You can say, I want to work on this problem. How can I design my goals in this area to make them more measurable or more clear or something? The other thing is you look at these nodes and I think they're sort of incomplete in a major way. I think a lot of how people judge things is a bit different than these. So a good example is grammar. Right now, you would be able to make a tree of the sentence, Joe hates cats. And you would be very confident that you had made the correct tree for that sentence and that you knew what you were doing and you knew what part of speech every word was. Right?
Yep.
And if you study grammar more, you will be able to do harder sentences and also be highly confident that you're getting it right. You will be able to expand the scope of what you can do and then evaluate it yourself and say, yup, I knew what I was doing, I got this right, this didn't involve some like tricky thing I don't know yet. And so that type of knowledge that you build up where you get better at grammar and able to evaluate more sentences doesn't quite fit into any of these categories. It's just sort of like things they actually learned, practiced, and developed good judgment about. It's something like this. For example,
Okay.
you can do grammar analysis and a tree for Joe hates cats. If you study grammar more, you'll improve and be able to do harder sentences with similar high confidence. You can do this in any field. So this isn't just like a clear category of how you're doing it, but you just sort of learn things and develop knowledge and ability to judge and think about things.
So this is so like if you practice a lot of differentiation or integration or things, you start to get a sense just by looking at the algebra of a curve for like where to look for various things or what shape it has or what techniques are going to apply or things like that. You've sort of, even though all of the knowledge you've been acquiring is essentially explicit, you've managed to build up this intuition.
Sure. Yeah. People. Yeah. So if you actually learn some of the concepts properly, like nouns, verbs, modifiers, conjunctions, and prepositions, then you can look at a lot of sentences and say, that one's a noun, that one's a modifier, etc. And you can go through all the words and be like, okay, I knew how all of them worked. And then you can get an advanced sentence and say, well, I don't know what that thing is. That one's outside of the realm of the stuff I'm used to dealing with. You can actually
Mm.
tell the difference between the stuff you know and the stuff you don't know. You can know when to say, this answer is only a maybe versus this answer I'm highly confident about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But a lot of people, it's all kind of a blurry fog and they're not really sure about any of it. Like they sort of get confused from the start and nothing is ever crystal clear. And that makes it a lot harder for them to tell the difference between the stuff they know and the stuff they don't know because it's all just different degrees of confusion.
Mm-hmm. Yep. 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 Um, maybe patches are lighter and darker, but that's about it.
So finding ways to relate what you're doing to measurement and facts, or finding an answer key or an expert or something, these all help and they make it easier. But the more general purpose thing is just sort of learning it so that you have good judgment about it, even if you're not dealing with straight up facts and measurements.
My feeling is that if you go to learn something from someone without that being the end goal in general, then I mean, A, you're never going to be able to tell whether it's correct or not itself, but it's sort of it only works like the real thing you're studying is the other person, not the idea. And this is more obvious in cases where, like, as in if someone's like advertising like esoteric knowledge, which is a phrase that stuck in my mind, seeing a pamphlet for it many years ago. Like, you know, lots of people are never going to look into that, but the person who does, if they're only relying on the knowledge of this other person, then there's no way that that would ever lead to a situation where they could tell whether it was correct or not, because ultimately the goal, the necessary goal of that right hand part of the thing is missing.
Yeah, sometimes, so it's hard to say the answer key's wrong when all you're doing is using the answer key to tell you what's right. But you
Yep.
can find inconsistencies and
Yes.
self-contradictions, and so that's one of the ways people get out of cults or religions is they they find the answer key contradicts itself.
Yep. Convincing people that a contradiction is significant is sometimes difficult. Um, I've found.
Yeah, that I think is related partly to low standards. Because if it contradicts that should just like prima facie that's significant.
Yeah, well, particularly in places where, so when people have like a bad understanding of capitalism and socialism, and then essentially say, well, there's contradictions in both, so there's no benefit to choosing one or over the other type thing, or it doesn't matter which one I choose, or whatever else. That feels like an example.
Yeah, that's kind of the idea. It's all shades of gray. We can't come up with any decisive answers or clear answers. So it's all a bit arbitrary.
Yep.
Which that comes from their inability to make clear judgments about success and failure. It's their own inability to judge it objectively. They don't know how to do that. They haven't worked everything out and organized it in a way that they could make good judgments. And their conclusion is no one possibly could. Okay, so I had this other note over here, positive view. So overreaching is looking at things in a negative way. It's criticizing an error people do. But you can take a lot of the same ideas and look at them in terms of what does this teach us about how to live properly, how to think rationally, um, what should we be doing instead of what should we be avoiding.
Just a note while it's in my head,
Sure.
because I know you've sort of people tend to have a really bad reaction to overreaching, and there's a bunch of reasons potentially for that. Just looking at this occurs to me that if you just instead of looking at it as something people do, um, looking at the what is the explicit behavior of the thing that people aren't doing, and if you refer to that as well, as in, and then the message to people is you need to start doing X as opposed to stop doing Y, um, and so underreaching being the easy sort of intuitive guess at what you might call that, but maybe that would change people's reaction to it. Because this is, I mean, even just now, I feel like I could have guessed at a large proportion of the tree that we've explored so far, and I I already feel less familiar with this arm. I have some ideas, but it feels far more foreign.
I think there's definitely some advantages to looking at the positive side and giving it more emphasis, but overall, it's mostly not going to solve the problem.
Hmm.
The reason people dislike overreaching in general is because they're the kind of people who get arithmetic wrong and basic grammar and misread like half of my sentences and make basic logic errors, and it's so many things that like they maybe hopefully would have learned by 5th grade, and that is what they don't like, is the idea that they personally are missing so many prerequisites and are so ignorant and uneducated.
Hmm.
A lot of them, they're completely fine with the concept in general, or even will praise it and say, yeah, that's a good point, because they think, yeah, most people are dumb and should change and so on. And it's when it's applied to them personally and their own failings. And so one of the things I bring up with people is common ground. Like, to have a discussion, you need to have some things that you both believe that you agree on that you can use as premises that are non-controversial. So you have to have some starting points. So you're not trying to explain everything.
Yep.
So you have some things that are like safe to refer to that you can build on. And people are like, sure, yeah, that makes sense as a generic concept. I agree with that. Seems rational. And you can link to non-FI stuff that says the same thing. Like there are some less wrong articles discussing that similar stuff. And they're okay with the concept, and they're okay with the idea that uh, that to get to common ground, you simplify, you go back to basics a bit. Like, because you're looking for the lowest common denominator, sort of. We're looking for the things we have in common with each other, so the simpler and easier it is, the more likely we're both going to know it and agree about it already. Um, and like that's for the more reasonable people, that can be okay. And where it really falls apart is when you try to say like we don't have common ground on how to write complete sentences that are clear and coherent. There's like really basic skills like that. Like they're always skipping steps in the middle of their paragraphs or something instead of having logical connections between each sentence. If you don't have like that kind of common ground, then they kind of give up and don't know what to do.
Hmm.
Because they all seem to want to think they're already a lot more competent than they are, and sort of higher up in the world. And
Yep. Should we build up this arm?
Yeah, okay. So, variety of things here. One is so a lot of failure comes from improper buffer management and project planning. You need to have some reasonable estimates of what it's going to take to succeed at something, and then have buffers to account for error and variance.
Yep. There's a lot of
And
synergistic stuff with theory of constraints and critical chain that immediately comes to mind there.
yeah, I was taking their word buffers.
Yep.
So this is one of the things that helps with overreaching. For example, the overbooking one schedule could be replaced with 33% flex time, which is the rough rule of thumb from TOC, is to take 33% of the entire project and make it buffers. And similarly, you can apply that to budgeting. 1/3 of your income should be flexible instead of mandatory things like paying the rent or something.
Yep. Yep. I think
And
critical. I think in critical chain they talk about 50%. I'm not sure if that was ever updated or not though, or whether it's just in the book. Is there any real
no, it's
significance to the difference, or?
no, it's the same thing from a different perspective. So if you suppose that the project is estimated to take 10 hours, then the buffer should be 5 hours, which is 50% of the project.
Ah, yep.
But
It's
the 5
yeah,
hours
one.
is 1/3 of the 15 total.
Yep, that makes perfect sense.
So yeah, I'm using their number. It's the same one.
Yeah. So if you were the because I was thinking about it from like how much of my day should I keep as um uh flex sort of stuff, and that is obviously I can't add another 50% to my day, but I can yeah, but I can in that case for the day you take 33%. If I could add, I would add 50%, so it was 33 the total.
Yep. And so these numbers are just first approximations, and you can adjust them and stuff, but a lot of people, like, they're not even at the first approximation yet. They haven't realized that they should have a buffer. Critical chain focuses a lot on time buffers for projects, but you can apply the same concept to other resources, like if the project needs money, like if you're not sure exactly what you have to buy for the project, and you're estimating like I'm going to need to buy this and this and it's going to cost this much, then if your maximum budget is like the exact amount of the estimate, then you're probably in trouble. I mean, there's a high risk of being in trouble.
So this is a really, really bad part of startup culture, at least as far as I experienced, was the advice we received essentially was like, as in, if you're asked for a budget by like a potential investor or something, is like everything is accounted for, everything is this, we're going to spend it on this, whatever else, and that was like pervasive, as opposed to yeah, the idea of like including an extra 20%, for example, was usually what I sort of figured would be a nice amount, but yeah, was strongly argued against. I wonder. Anyway,
Yeah, that makes sense. I can see people doing that, and yeah, I think it would be better to go to the investors and say, here's our plan for what we want to buy and do and so on. And we estimated it will take $2 million, so we're asking for $3 million.
Yeah.
Because variance. That would be better. Okay, so other positive view stuff. You could do a lot of stuff just about rationality. Clarity, simplicity, improving your ability to correct errors, detect and correct. So taking the prerequisite issue, you can look at it as a positive skill of prerequisites are a thing that sometimes exists in the world, and being able to identify when you're dealing with them or not accurately is really useful. You know when, if you skip X, Y will fail or not. You can see that instead of as a complaint, like people keep skipping X and then it's causing all this failure, as it's a skill you can develop to be good at figuring out when do you really need part one before you do part two, or when is it actually optional and people are just sort of throwing it in unnecessarily. A lot of confusion about prerequisites comes because there's more than one way to do something. So, like, if you have a particular goal, you might come up with 5 different project plans to accomplish it, and each one has different prerequisites. And so for most of the prerequisites, you could look at one of the 5 plans and say, hey, look, it's not a prerequisite. So to reach this goal, that's not a prerequisite. And that's correct, but you have to actually pick one of the plans and then have the prerequisites that apply for that plan.
Hmm.
So there's positive concepts there to understand and uh, get good at using and organizing in your mind and so on. So another part of the positive view could be, how do we use practice to learn effectively? So the rough steps are 1, learn to do X at all, get it correct a few times. 2, practice, reduce error rate, get it correct many times. 3, practice more, get efficient, get resource use lower to do it, e.g. go faster with less conscious attention. Autopilot, habit, auto. Okay, so then another of the important concepts is mastery. This can give you a view on like what sorts of things you should be doing in life, just like the practice stuff. So to do complex things, you need building blocks. or you need solid building blocks.
Yeah, particularly if they're self-reliant and one of them fails, then
So what do you do about this? You have to develop things to the point that they are ready to use as building blocks. So you don't have to do this with all the things you're learning because some of them you're just learning for one-off purposes. But if it's something you want to use as a component in future large complex projects, then you need to learn it to mastery.
hmm.
So it's a bit like with programming, there are lower level functions that are components of higher level functions. And the lower level ones get called many, many times because each call of a high level function will make a tree. The high level function A calls B and C, and then B and C each call several functions, and each of those calls several functions. And then some of the lower level ones, like plus or and, get called many, many, many times in total.
Hmm.
So those lower level ones, they have to have a very, very high success rate because they're
Yep.
getting called so many times. They're at the bottom of the pyramid.
Memory leaks sort of seem to me as a good example in that if you had a 1 byte memory leak in a function, then it doesn't matter if you call it half a dozen times in execution. But if it's in your plus function, then you're very,
Yeah.
very quickly going to have a crash.
Yeah, memory leaks are a good example because um, computer functions we normally kind of think of as perfect. Like the concept of an error rate for a plus function is weird.
Hmm.
It's not it's not quite like a lot of our philosophical ideas where we figure they're all not perfect and they're all a little screwy. Whereas people feel like their mathematical functions are like exact and perfect. Um, so an error, a memory leak provides a way of attaching an error to a plus function that can have varying sizes. You could have a big memory leak or a little one.
Yep. I was thinking, so just as we're getting close to the hour, I had some questions about some grammar stuff from last time, or from doing some exercises and things. Should we talk about that and maybe what to do between this and the next, or
Okay.
um,
I'm going to give you a link to this document.
thank you.
It has all the other stuff in it, but that's fine.
So in terms of yeah, I feel like because I haven't made much progress in the grammar thing, I'm gonna go back and essentially have the same goals I had yesterday. Maybe, I mean, well, I'll probably end up answering this if I did that, but I had some questions about when I was writing the thing this morning, uh, the overreaching thing. The phrase lying to um, sort of struck me as odd, but I didn't know how to deal with that because the to is it's just to, but it's not at the start. Anyway, so I documented my little so lying to yourself was the phrase, I think. Or lying to and fooling yourself. So the reason that in point two there, the reason that it sort of stuck out to me was because I separated them like that,
Yeah.
which I think is okay grammatically.
Yes.
But it made it really obvious that like lying to, because if it fits in the same place as fooling yourself, anyway, so I think I concluded that fooling is a participle, which sort of makes sense because you'd use the equivalent is the verb version of fool.
Yeah, so my first guess would be gerund because it has an ing ending and it's playing a noun role.
Oh, it is playing now. So yeah, I need to. So gerunds that are playing noun roles really seem to do me for a loop. In that, so it was actually my first guess, and then I concluded that it was participle.
This one
Why
is
did I
tricky
didn't document
because
it
it's
enough?
not a complete sentence. I think you'll have more success analyzing the grammar of complete sentences.
Yeah. Even I mean, maybe I might try after this lying to yourself. Just analyze that and see. Oh, actually, sorry, I did in the sense that I analyzed you are fooling yourself as a thing. And then fooling yourself, I say yourself is a noun, and then fooling adjective, and then during the session today, I said it can't be. So but if it's a gerund,
So in this particular place, it's a list of nouns, like denial is a noun. Each of these is a thing people do. So lying to yourself is a thing people do, a concept.
it's a noun phrase in the grammatically.
Yeah, but it's not a complete sentence, so it's more confusing because of that.
Yeah.
Because when it's not a
Okay. Yeah.
complete sentence, basically that means there's something implied. And it's harder when you have to deal with implied stuff instead of actual words in front of you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you need context, like the video title the other day. Message the
Yeah.
kid who called yesterday. And it occurs to me that I imagine there's potentially some incredibly ambiguous stuff that you could think up in that regard, like where people just take totally different meanings. So yeah, partial sentences, they're definitely beyond me. But yeah, I need to think more. I just about the idea of like why it's a gerund, particularly. But I think as I do more exercises, I think that'll become a bit more obvious. Cool.
Okay, so stuff to do is continue with the grammar and then review the overreaching essays or read what you haven't read or something.
Yep.
And write down a few thoughts about those if you have more time.
Yep. Will do. Okay. Sounds good.
Okay, bye.
See you next time.